Madam Minister, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the International Institute for Peace, the Austrian International Institute of Politics, the University of Graz, I want to welcome you all here in the ministry. My first words are first of thanks to the ministry that we can have this event here in this place, in your second home. And we are very grateful for the cooperation. If I mention only one name, it's the Ambassador Hartmann, with whom we started the talks, but there were many others in the ministry who were very helpful to organize this event at this place. I was the first time in Sarajevo officially on the 1000th days of the siege of Sarajevo in dreadful days. And of course, this made a strong impression on myself and kept me working for the region and especially for Bosnia and Herzegovina. And I got to know that many Austrians were very active and fully engaged. Again, if I mention only some, it does not mean that there are many others. And especially, of course, the high representatives, Wolfgang Petric, Valentin Inzko, who are here also, and I saw their engagement and their orientation on the common good of the whole country and not supporting one religious group or one ethnic group or the other. And then when I was in the European Parliament and I could also work for the region, I saw how this engagement had successes, but also sometimes fails, not because our people have not been engaged, and especially, of course, in this room, one has to mention Alois Molk, but because the willingness was not always there to do the job done necessary for their own people. Of course, the history of the relationship between Austria and Bosnia and Herzegovina is a long one, not always an easy one. If we think about the occupation and then annexation of the country by the Austrian-Hungarian monarchy, and also on some of the arguments at the time to prevent Serbia to take Bosnia was one of the reasons mentioned at that time. And that, of course, was perhaps not an easy element of the whole politics in the time of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, and it had consequences for many years. I remember very well when I had the opportunity to accompany the federal president of Austria, Klestil, at a short visit in Sarajevo, when one of the interpreters said to me, "You know why we like the Austrians so much? Because it let us, the Bosniaks, our property, and supported the landowners in our country." And this showed already that, of course, there was already at that time the conflict between the different ethnic or religious groups, and it was not easy for the administration at that time to overcome these kind of difficulties. But interesting, at that time it was the common Minister of Finance who was responsible for the development of Bosnia and Herzegovina in the Austrian monarchy. And he said, of course, not only that it was the interest to have Serbia not getting hold of Bosnia and Herzegovina, but he said what is necessary is to retain the ancient tradition of the land, vivified and purified by modern ideas. In some way, it could also be a statement of the European Commission today, maybe more nuanced and maybe with a more or less arrogance. So we see that the problem of the living together was one over in the past. But what I always noticed in my visits, and the two representatives, and many other ambassadors and many others I could not mention here, sitting in this room, they were always helpful in bringing people together and not to create new divisions. They will always help us to say, you have to come to an agreement. And the ambassador of Bosnia and Herzegovina knows very well how important that is in order to get forward also into the European Union. what the Emperor Franz Joseph at that time expressed in a declaration that the people should live together in harmony and they should respect each other's religion and freely, of course, use their own religion to the common benefit, is still something we should recognize and remember today. Unfortunately, nationalism in the region is still very much alive. Nationalism which is not automatic given because there are Serbs, Bosniaks, Croats, and there are Muslims and Catholics and Orthodox, but because it is misused by some politicians, journalists, and other people who think they can win by fostering nationalistic ideas and not fostering communities. Anyway, to come to an end, yes, there's a lot of work to do, and we can be very thankful that many great Europeans and Austrians, especially Austrians, were so active in the region and are still active with the support of the ministry. And the minister was also visiting the region quite soon after she took office, which was also a sign of our support for the region. But may I mention somebody who was very much engaged in the region, but he's no longer with us, unfortunately, Erhard Busek. When he wrote together with Christoph Soliers, edit a book in honor of Wolfgang Petri some time ago. And here Erhard Busek wrote, "What Europe needs is some shock therapy. A wake-up call is much needed, but it's not enough. We need a big bang. We need more noise about the great idea because the sound of Europe is not loud enough at the moment." End of quotation. This is what we have to say as Europeans to ourselves, but of course we would like to have strong support by the United States of America as a partner, even as a leading partner, as it was the case when the Dayton Agreement was negotiated. And that is at least our wish, because we could be more effective together. And in that sense, I asked exceptionally the ambassador of the United States of America to speak now with the consent and agreement of the minister, because the ambassador has to leave early, and I hand over the microphone to the ambassador of the United States of America, and I thank you for your attention and thank you for coming to this event. Thank you.
Thank you. It's my speech here. What a warm welcome, ladies and gentlemen, as we come together this evening to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the Dayton Accords. I would like to thank all of the people who are here this evening for helping to make tonight possible. Most especially, I'd like to thank the Foreign Minister, Meinl-Reisinger. Thank you for such a warm welcome for me when I arrived here in Vienna on the 11th of November. What a warm welcome from all of the folks in our Austrian government. We appreciate everything that you've done to make tonight so special. Tonight we do celebrate something very special, and that is the Dayton Peace Accords and America's commitment to foster peace throughout the world. America has always been that beacon of hope for countries in need, for countries who aspire to democracy. I like to sometimes say that America is that warm blanket on a cold night to all other countries who hope to see it the democratic way and to have respect for people regardless of their political persuasion, their religious persuasion. And I've said for many years, including in our own country, that what makes America so special, as well as Austria and other countries throughout the world, is that we as Americans have the right to see things differently. It's something we should celebrate. In no way does that mean that we should kill each other or disagree so much that we can't break bread. I think we're living in a time where the world can be a pretty scary place, and what we really all want to see is that we're committed to working together and we're committed to peace. It's such a simple principle, but it's something that's so important to the world. I can tell you, as President Trump's personal representative here in Austria, a cornerstone of his entire administration is peace throughout the world. We certainly celebrate our involvement in the Dayton Accords. We completely realize that there's still work to do, but we are very committed to being a part of that. We recognize that it's very important for the members of the Western Balkans to have a big say in that, and they have a lot to do with that. But it's something certainly that's very important to this administration. As we move forward and we look around the world, I'm optimistic when I see what was just perfected in the Middle East, things that many people throughout this world said would never be possible, but things that have become possible. And I think that if we all open our minds and we open our hearts to what can be and what is possible, that truly we can accomplish anything. I certainly know that's your spirit, Madam Minister, and I think Austria is very fortunate to have someone like you as someone who cares very deeply about this country. Moving forward, there is a lot of work to do, but America is a steadfast partner together with all the included parties and affected parties. And just want to thank every one of you for the role that you've played. And with that, I'll turn it over to the Foreign Minister. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. No, I was asked to invite you specifically to come, and of course, please, we're very happy that you're here.
That's my hands-on personality.
I want to thank for the commitment of the ambassador and hand over to you the microphone. Please, thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, Your Excellency, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, actually, I wanted to start by remembering the 30 years of the Dayton Peace Accord. But let me start maybe by mentioning that this is a very special day for me, because today, this morning, I've attended this conference by the Erste Foundation about the future of Europe, time to decide Europe it was. And now I'm here remembering the 30 years of the Dayton Peace Accord. And as I was listening to you, and here we are quoting Erhard Busseck, I was wondering what kind of big bang would Europe need now, apart from the war in Ukraine, apart from everything that has been going on, to wake up and to realize how important it is to geostrategically strengthen our positioning with the tool of enlargement, and how important it is for Europe to look back 30 years and to imagine and to envision what 30 years from now can be accomplished if we stick to our values, if we stick to diplomacy, if we stick to a rules-based order, and if we stick to the prospect of a common, united, reunited Europe. This was just something I wanted to say in the beginning, because I think it is quite interesting to have this view forward and backward on the same day. But yes, but when we speak about the Dayton Peace Agreement, we immediately remember a very dark chapter of European history. A war was raging in our neighborhood, and it was not far away. It was not in another continent, and not even 500 kilometers away, but here in the very heart of Europe. Many of many of us witnessed this war, and we remember the images, and we also remember the moment when diplomacy prevailed. The Dayton Accord ended the war. It showed that diplomacy could give birth to peace. For Austria, this was more than a distant crisis. It was a wake-up call at that time. It reminded us that peace is always fragile, and that even in Europe, we must not take it for granted. Sadly, as I said, 30 years on, we are in the same position, it seems, and we didn't learn our lessons, probably, or properly. So I think it's just also very timely to think about that. But as a very close neighbor, we directly felt the effects of Yugoslavia's disintegration. And I remember it, I mean, I was a young girl. For me, it was not a faraway war. It was the first war ever I witnessed it when growing up. And it was so close. I remember the people coming, and of course, it was about our security, it was about our economy, and about the human connection that interlinked our regions, not only at that time, but before that, and also nowadays. Tens of thousands fled to Austria during those years. Many returned home, of course, but a lot of them, luckily I must say, stayed and are now a very vital and integral part of our cultural life, of our society, and we are happy and proud that it is the case. The Dayton Peace Agreement ended the fighting and reconfirmed Bosnia and Herzegovina and as a sovereign Bosnia and Herzegovina, and established 2 entities and, let me add, also 10 cantons. It was an extraordinary achievement, but anyone who looked closely understood that peace was only the first step. As we understand, with the Middle East, and we hopefully will see soon in Ukraine, but it's only the first step. The country faced enormous challenges: destroyed infrastructure, weak institutions, a society divided by fear and, of course, trauma, and a profound lack of trust among its communities. From the very beginning, Austria actively supported the new state politically, economically, diplomatically, and let me emphasize, it's not always the case, also militarily. Austrian soldiers have been standing in Bosnia and Herzegovina's side for decades. First in a NATO-led implementation force, IFOR, followed by the stabilization force, SFOR, and since 2004 in the EU-led operation EUFOR Althea, a mission Austria commanded for many years and stands ready to do so again in 2027. And let me say that today in the Austrian parliament, the mission was renewed for another period. Their contribution has brought security, credibility, and confidence to a fragile environment. And I want to express my deep gratitude to all those who served. I'm very honored to welcome 2 former High Representatives, Wolfgang Petric and Vladimir Insko, who served the people of Bosnia and Herzegovina for a combined 15 years. 15 years, that's a long period, and I hear very good stories about that time, so I really see that you understood what Bosnia is about and what should be done. Your leadership was crucial in building rule of law and stabilizing the country's institutions. I also warmly welcome Professor Marco, who served on the Constitutional Court in the early years after Dayton and contributed to shaping a functioning constitutional system. 30 years on, we can see how far Bosnia and Herzegovina have come. The guns are silent, institutions exist, a generation has grown up without experiencing war, and these achievements matter. But it is still too early to say mission accomplished. The mission was never only to stop a war. It was to build a stable, democratic, and functioning state. That work is still ongoing. Political ownership remains fragile, and we still see leaders, in the last month especially, who attempt to undermine the country's unity and constitutional order. For too long, the European Union believed that the simple promise of membership alone would be enough to drive reforms. Well, it was not. 2 decades after the Thessaloniki summit, the EU perspective remains too slow, too abstract, and too distant for many citizens. Now is the moment when Bosnia and Herzegovina needs something different, a credible path, concrete deliverables, and a visible progress. The EU must offer a process that is faster and more strategic. It's about time to decide, Europe, without abandoning its principles. Enlargement is not a technical exercise. Yes, it is also a very technical exercise, but that's not what it's about. It's a geopolitical necessity. As I said, the brutal war of Russia against Ukraine has made this painfully clear. The war has reminded us that stability in our neighborhood is fragile, and if we do not act, others will. There is no such thing as a vacuum in geopolitics. So for Austria, the message is very clear. Supporting the Western Balkans is not an act of charity. It is an investment in our shared security and also prosperity. If we fail to export stability, we will import instability, and that is a risk Europe cannot afford. The decision of the European Council to open accession negotiations with Bosnia and Herzegovina therefore was an important and historic moment, but it must be followed by real reform efforts from within the country. The people of Bosnia and Herzegovina, especially the younger generation, support joining the European Union. I think that it's the most important duty for politicians to path ways towards the future and not build up walls. And that is exactly what the young people, the young generation expects from politicians. They want opportunities, they want freedoms, they want economic prospects that, of course, also come with membership. So, can we say mission accomplished? Not yet. Secessionist tendencies remain dangerous, groundless, and unacceptable. They harm the country's stability, they damage the prospects of the people, they build walls where there should be paths, and they obstruct the European path in particular. Austria's position is firm. We support Bosnia and Herzegovina, but we will also respond clearly to those who undermine its territorial integrity, as we have done in the past. Austria's engagement will continue politically, diplomatically, and, as I stressed, militarily. We remain committed to EU for Althea, and we will remain a strong voice for the Western Balkans in the European Union, especially also in this week, where I will again welcome the Friends of Western Balkans and the Western Balkan countries here in Vienna when they come together for the OSCE ministerial meeting. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we should seize the moment. We should think back 30 years, and we should think forward with a clear common vision. I heard a very interesting sentence. I don't remember. I think it was in Northern Ireland, where someone said, we may share the same history, but not always the same memories. This is true for the Balkans, for the Western Balkans in particular, but I'm sure that everyone should agree that we would like to share the same future. And this is something we should really work on, and I really want to thank the IIP, the OEP, and the University of Graz for co-organizing this very important event with us. Your work brings together experts, scholars, practitioners who have shaped Bosnia and Herzegovina's democratic development and its path since Dayton. This dialogue allows us not only to reflect us on the past, but to look ahead, as I said. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Minister, for the commitment, for the political, for the economic, but I fully agree also for the military aspect of supporting the Western Balkans. And now I ask Beate and Cihic to invite your guests for the panel, and the panel discussion can start. Thank you.
Good evening. Does it work? Yes. So, good evening from my side. My name is Vedran Džihić. I'm Senior Researcher at the Austrian Institute for International Affairs. I'm happy to welcome you, Excellencies, Ambassador of Bosnia and Herzegovina, ladies and gentlemen, friends, youngsters from the Western Balkans. I'm very proud to welcome also youth representatives which were engaged in the project that the International Institute for Peace, RENA Institute, and my institute were co-running in the last few years. 30 years after Dayton, mission accomplished, question mark. Austria is a peace actor in Bosnia and Herzegovina. I'm happy to chair the panel. And before I introduce my panel, just a few words, short words of introduction. I was in Sarajevo together with Josef Marko 2 weeks ago. The Bosnian Academy of Sciences and the University of Sarajevo organized 2 large conferences to celebrate, under quotation marks, the Dayton Peace Accords. And I have to say that I felt not in a mood for festivities and celebrations like we have it on the streets of Vienna, when you just step out of the building of this wonderful hall, you will see the festivities around the Christmas holidays. And I have to say, in Sarajevo, I did not have the feeling that many celebrated. I had a feeling also listening to analysis and insights of experts to be in a kind of a Groundhog Day scenario to a certain extent. So I even remember celebrating the 10th anniversary of Dayton, 15th, 20th, 25th, 30th. And today it's again time to decide, time to seize the moment. You see, I mean, it's a huge period of time, and I think we have to take this question mark seriously and to ask and to look back. What have we done? What are we doing right now? And what are the next steps to be taken? And of course, we are going to discuss it on the panel too. But I also want to say that I am strictly against the image of dysfunctional Bosnia and Herzegovina. So quite often you have these kind of a prejudices, images that the country is just on the brink of collapse. So everything is falling down the drain, political crisis. Yes, we have a very complex constitution. We have political crisis, but the country still lives on. And I just wanted to mention one momentum from the last few weeks. I don't know if you are so much into the Bosnian folk music. Halid Bešlić, one of the most famous Bosnian singers, folk singers, probably comparable to Udo Jürgens of Austria back then. I don't know. Cilatala Schürzen, I don't know. On a serious side, Halid Bešlić died in October. And on 7th of October, 250,000 people from Sarajevo to Banja Luka, to Mostar, to Konjic, to Podgorica, Belgrade, Croatia, Vienna, Vancouver, Chicago, showed up to stand together, to sing the songs, and to send a powerful sign, actually, that there is something about this Bosnian spirit, Bosnian Herzegovinian spirit, I have to say, that still lives up. So there is a certain resilience, there are problems, and I think we need to look closer into the dilemmas that we see in front of our eyes. I'm grateful for of course, for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, for cooperation institutes, but first and foremost, mostly to the panelists of our today's panel discussion. I'm going to introduce them briefly, starting from Wolfgang, is today on my right side. Wolfgang Petric, he is, I mean, there is no need to introduce Wolfgang in this particular house. This is his house where he worked. He was in the 70s secretary of then Chancellor Bruno Kreisky. He was ambassador to Belgrade of Republic of Austria in the 90s, chief negotiator of the European Union at Rambouillet, at the negotiations between Serbia and Kosovo, and later on, as it was mentioned by the Madam Minister, High Representative of Bosnia and Herzegovina between 1999 and 2002. Next to Wolfgang sits Janeta Karabegovic. Interestingly enough, we have 3 original Bosnians on the table, all from the same region, part of Bosnia.
The best region?
Huh?
The best region?
I'm not going to judge, but we certainly like the region. That's the region of Krajina. Banja Luka, Janeta Karabegovic, who is Associate Professor at the University of Salzburg for Political Sciences, was born in Banja Luka, but she grew up from Berlin to the United States of America, and now she is in Salzburg, a Salzburgian Bosnian. Just to mention that Janeta recently published, 2023, a book entitled Bosnian Studies, Perspectives from an Emerging Field. So there is even Bosnian studies as a term, and I highly recommend not only Janeta Karabegovic's book, but also Wolfgang Petric, not to forget, just a few weeks ago published a book, Diplomatic Intervention in Times of Unpeace, Wolfgang, between 2013 to 2025. But I'm going to stop with advertising books on the panel. So on my left side, also born in Banja Luka, now associate assistant professor at the University of Graz, sits Amina Galiash. She is historian, and she has widely published on the Western Balkans and on Bosnia and Herzegovina. And we met several times in the last few weeks as a kind of a touring Dayton 30 years anniversary kind of a band, from Zurich to Sarajevo and now to Graz, and here we are in Vienna. Next to Armina, so we have a certain regional focus here. Bosnia, Banja Luka, Prijedor, Banja Luka, but then also Graz, quite strongly. Josef Marko, as Madame Minister said, former international judge of the Constitutional Court of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and I have to say a dear and true friend of Bosnia and Herzegovina. He was dean of the Faculty of Law at the University of Graz, and still, until today, keeps fighting, and he's probably going to tell us a few more details, fighting for a functional constitution of Bosnia and Herzegovina, 2025. And last but not least, Andreas Herdina. He was working in Bosnia back in the 90s when, if I'm not mistaken, Ambassador Inzko was ambassador to Bosnia and Herzegovina, first ambassador to Bosnia and Herzegovina after the end of the war. And Andreas Herdina was working for the Office of the High Representative, but he also laid on was in important positions at the European Commission in Brussels. So welcome all, and we are going to organize the discussion first on the panel with 2 rounds of short inputs, and I also want to open up for 2, let's see how we proceed time-wise, for 2 small rounds of questions from your side, Q&A. So, and I decided to proceed in a zigzagging kind of a principle. So, Bosnian friends, Bosnian. I would like to start with you, Janeta. So start from Banja Luka. And my first question to all of you in the first round is, when you look back, 30 years is a lot of time. When you look back at what happened in Bosnia in the meantime, and when you particularly look at the Austrian contribution, which was emphasized by the minister, what would you, in a way, emphasize and say, well, like crucial moments or even stories that you want to share from this kind of a large period of time that have shaped this mission with the question mark? Janeta, what will be your take?
Thank you for putting me first and on the spot in this regard, and sort of for asking this question. I was intrigued by the comment by the minister just now in her opening statements about sort of the first memories of remembering this was the first war of sort of active memory, and in my way, my life is also paralleled in this. This was some of my first memories of the war. but then also when the Dayton Peace Accords were signed and that whole process, it has very much shaped my childhood and ultimately now my life. 30 years later, we're sitting here and I'm speaking on this. So it's interesting when you say sort of share stories or share perspectives, how much of many of our professional and personal lives have been intertwined by this, DPA, Dayton Peace Accords, and various annexes in this regard. So I think that's an important point to sort of stress on at this stage. I think maybe I'll touch on 2 points, and then in the second round I'll maybe touch on the third point. When we speak about Austria and the role of Austria and sort of looking back at the last 30 years of Dayton, and I'm in my normal life, in my day-to-day, I'm a migration scholar, so I'll focus those 2 points on sort of these aspects of migration. And then traditionally when we talk about migration, we talk about them in these sort of migration flows. So maybe these 2 points will be focused on, what is called, flows, let's say, between Austria and Bosnia and Herzegovina. And these have been, very much traditional historical migration flows and, from the guest worker relationships during the Yugoslav period, but in particular in the sort of immediate war period and the post-war period, the ongoing sort of, Austria was the second largest recipient of refugees from Bosnia and Herzegovina. And these individuals have, for the large part, stayed in Austria, where they, in countries like Germany, a lot of them went to the United States of America, for example, or left to other countries, or returned back to Bosnia. And while there were sort of returnee examples, many individuals stayed in Austria. And so if we look at the sort of numbers of individuals with Bosnian and Herzegovinian citizenships living in Austria, this has been relatively stable over the last, I looked at numbers in the sort of on the way over here. In 2002, the number was about 107,000. In 2025, that number has remained relatively stable at about 100,000, right? And so this has been both not the same amount of individuals, because obviously individuals have become Austrian citizens. And in fact, if we look at sort of this relationship in terms of citizenship between Bosnians and Austrians, Bosnians have consistently been the largest number of individuals on an annual basis taking Austrian citizenship, except for since 2021 Brexit, so more British people taking Austrian citizenship and a little bit more Turks. But basically until 2021, if you look at the numbers consistently, it has always been the largest number of individuals becoming Austrian citizens in this sort of small percentage of individuals becoming Austrian citizens has been consistent. And so I think this is a relationship that has been very sort of marked by individuals, again, these personal stories that I mentioned at the beginning, but also through the second point that I wanted to make in terms of FDI flows. Now, if we look at sort of the last 30 years, and Vedran mentioned the book on Bosnian studies. Before the Bosnian studies book, I published a book on Bosnia and Herzegovina's foreign policy, and yes, there is a foreign policy of Bosnia and Herzegovina. It's there. It's not a how-to-do foreign policy, but it does exist. And we do have the ambassador here. Thank you for being here. So it does exist. But I wanted to sort of mention, when we were looking at the book and sort of doing the research in terms of, what country is the largest investor in the country? What country has the largest FDI presence, larger than the United States, larger than Russia, larger than Turkey? That's been Austria. And that's also been relatively consistent if we look at, the last 3 decades. So I think this is an important aspect to sort of think about when we think about this relationship of how do we bring peace, how do we get to peace? A lot of it also comes through development and through having these kinds of consistent relationships between countries bilaterally, not just diplomatically, but also economically. So maybe I'll stop there and continue later.
Thank you so much. I was just reminded of the latest soccer game between Austria and then Bosnia and Herzegovina, and many people ask me, are you in favor of Austria and Bosnia? I just said I'm for us, for our people, which refers to a mixed and plurality of identities, which is, I think, an enriching feature of Austria, and also of the effect of the Austrian commitment to Bosnia, but also to the wider region of the Western Balkans. Now, Wolfgang Petric, what I forgot to say, that Wolfgang is my president at the Austrian Institute for International Affairs. So now I have to I watch out what I do. Wolfgang could, of course, tell hundreds and thousands of stories from his personal life, from his engagement in Bosnia, from the very beginning on, being head of the OHR, but also from his commitment to the region ever since you left Bosnia and Herzegovina. So Wolfgang, I'm curious to see what you pick up now when you look back at the last 30 years and try to evaluate the Austrian engagement. So what comes to your mind first?
Oh, that's a very long story, and I still have not written my professional memoirs because I don't know where to start, actually. And the same applies for today now, and it's such a short period of time to say what's really relevant is very extremely difficult. Maybe some basic things that one should keep in mind when we speak now 30 years after the end of this bloodiest war which had happened in post-war Europe. I think what's important is also to think what actually happened to Yugoslavia. Because Bosnia-Herzegovina is in many ways a mini Yugoslavia with its multi-ethnic makeup, with its own identity, which is always being disputed. There is a Bosnian identity that includes, of course, all these three ethnic communities, but it goes far beyond. Yeah? And like in the case of Ukraine and the Russian attack, it was also a problem that actually this kind of specific Bosnian identity was simply not recognized by, at the time in particular, Belgrade, but I also have to say not in the case of Zagreb at the time. The idea from the 1940s to divide Bosnia-Herzegovina was very much around at the time. And I believe that is the main explanation why the most terrible part of the bloody dissolution of Yugoslavia really took place in Bosnia-Herzegovina. That is, I believe, important to remember. And when you speak about the difficulties that today, 30 years later, still exist, these are the root causes. Yeah? That this was not just your usual war of aggression, which it was, of course, also, but it was a civil war. You know, it was a war amongst people who could talk to each other. You know, and this is what they did across the front lines. I still remember when I was there, and the Bosnian film Ničija zemlja won the Oscar. Yeah, and one of the scenes in there is how soldiers on the one side and on the other side shout at each other. Yeah. So this is the real tragedy what happened. And of course, at the time, Europe and the United States were simply not unanimous in understanding and comprehending what the fall of Yugoslavia really means. And I believe it's important to remember that there were basically two, how should I say, theories around how to avoid the war and the dissolution. One was actually to say, we need to keep Yugoslavia together as long as possible in order to prevent it falling into a war. The other opposite option or a theory was now more from Bonn and Vienna coming. We need to recognize the secessionist movements, and we need to recognize as early as possible those states in order to prevent the war. Now, 30 years later, we know both theories did not work. Yeah? So this is the political side, the very basic side of what has happened there. what we were confronted with, you know, at the time. And we, of course, also remember now against the backdrop of these peace efforts in Gaza and in Ukraine, how difficult it was in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And arguably, the first peace proposal by the Portuguese Foreign Minister Coutinho was most likely the best one. Why? Because it followed actually immediately after the start of the conflict, many more elements for, so to speak, for keeping Bosnia-Herzegovina or an early end to the war in Bosnia-Herzegovina was around. But we know the rest is history. We're not talking about the other efforts. It was only the effort in Dayton, which was well prepared, I should say, very much in contrast to today, what Washington is doing. That is a wholly different story, but it's also a different story that for today. We shouldn't, I'm not going to delve into it. And we keep in mind that was the unipolar moment. So everything that happened was, of course, dominated and almost dictated, and also, how should I say, accepted by Europe, and that was the American way. And the historic achievement of the Dayton Accords, of course, is it ended a war. And Richard Holbrooke wrote the book and appropriately called it To End a War. But the Dayton Accords was never a blueprint for a modern European state. Yeah? The reasons are manifold. I would just like to mention a few in order to see how difficult it still today is and how difficult also the peace implementation has been. Dayton is not one piece. The Dayton Accords, unlike Rambouillet, which we negotiated, Dayton consists of the Washington Agreement of 1994, yeah, which stopped the war within the war between Bosniaks and Croats. And Dayton exists of the, so to speak, what was added. Basically the recognition of Republika Srpska, yeah, as an entity, highly decentralized, but extremely important, a way to finalize the efforts on the part of the Americans. The role of the Europeans at the time, it was the European Special Envoy was Carl Bildt, who then happened to be also the first High Representative, played practically no role. The Russians were there, Ivanov and his people were working there as well. Also something which reminds me of Rambouillet in 1999, where the Russians were still actively and also constructively involved in finding a peaceful solution. This is a reminder, and we think what is happening today and how different the situation nowadays is. This kind of asymmetric situation for Dayton, yeah, is extremely important to keep in mind, because all the problems, the future problems after 1995, all emanate from this asymmetry. Yeah? On the one hand, you had, it was mentioned also, a highly decentralized federation of Bosnia-Herzegovina. Also important to remind our public and those who know most of what I'm saying anyhow, but Croatia's, and I see the Croatian ambassador, Croatia's interest was when in Dayton, not really so much the fate of the Bosnian Croats, because they already had the Washington Agreement. It was Eastern Slavonia, the return of Eastern Slavonia, and of course also the Krajina issue. Yeah? So, I mean, that is something where it is necessary not to just focus on Bosnia, but to see the absolutely legitimate interest of Croatia on the one side, and the interest, of course, of Serbia on the other. Because if you follow the ethnic logic, then clearly Republika Srpska should be part of Serbia proper. Yeah? And that is, of course, also at the core of the problem, and what was not achieved in the 30 years, to change the mindset of the people, particularly of the political class, that collective rights are important, but they must not dominate public policy and everyday life. You need a citizen-oriented, I'm not saying centered, I'm saying citizen-oriented governance system. Yeah? And to balance these two, collective rights and individual citizen rights, this is obviously something which we did not manage together with the politicians there. Now I could go on there are technical issues which are very, for example, this kind of naive belief that elections create democracy. Yeah? Therefore, the more elections you have, the sooner Bosnia will be democratic. So therefore, in the first 5 years, there were elections every other year. Yeah? Which, by the way, destroyed the first and only non-nationalist government, which we sort of cobbled together in early 2001, because this government had basically Lagumdžija and all these people around him. Then Croats were involved, and everybody. But it was a decisive departure from this ethnic sentiment and ethnic ideology. But it only had 1.5 years. Which government can achieve anything in 1.5 years? And the next elections that happened, at the time already my successor, Beate, was in place. Of course, this was the return of the nationalists. And ever since, this kind of attitude is there and dominates the situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina, although you do have elements of a civic approach to politics and society. But this one is not strong enough. I might stop here and we'll go on later maybe.
Thank you, Wolfgang. In the meantime, Bosnia and Herzegovina was taken over by Bulgaria, because Bulgaria has been having frequent elections. But in any case, we are entering a new electoral cycle. We just had elections for the President of Republic of Srpska, and we are entering the year 2026, where we are going to have general elections in October 2026. So in a way, Bosnia and Herzegovina is today almost in an electoral campaign. Now to turn to my left to Armina Galiaš. Armina, you are a historian. 30 years, of course, is, from your point of view, from historian point of view, a short period of time. But when you look back in these 30 years, what would be your major takeaways? And do you see a specific contribution of Austria that you would like to emphasize in these 30 years, something that comes to your mind when you think about post-Dayton from 1995 until today?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your question and for invitation. And I did also now have this train trip from Graz to Vienna, and I thought about it. And my idea was, how can Bosnia contribute to Austria, or what can Austria learn from Bosnian case in the past 30 years? And these are my pretty fresh thoughts. So some would say that Bosnia has been living in a state of permanent polycrisis for decades. And on the other side, I would say or argue that European Union, or even better Europe, including a United Kingdom and as well other parts of Europe, Western Balkans, which are not part of European Union, now facing a similar polycrisis. That means we are not talking about the crisis as a sum of crises, or more in the term of Adam Tooze, who described these crises which reinforce or escalate or trigger one another. And on the other side, it is the politics of fear. And this fear that we now see across Europe is something we have observed in Bosnia for 30 years or even more when analyzing Bosnian political actors, all of us. And when we are looking at the figures such, I would say Milorad Dodik, but we can also say Radovan Karadzic, 35 years ago, we see political leaders staging themselves as saviors, as presenting themselves as authentic voice of the people, and claim to bring hope and solutions. They spread nationalism, nativism, so blood and soil theory, and anti-intellectualism. They are protecting so-called Volkskultur, so people culture, and authoritarianism, chauvinism, conservatism, and all of this, and they are trying certainly to bring the media under their control. And what is really important, there is always the shift of the boundaries of what is socially and politically sayable, so Zagba, what is possible to say. And if you now think on Orban, on Kikel, on Trump, I'm so happy that the American ambassador is not anymore here, or Le Pen, it becomes really difficult to identify significant differences in a form. I mean, content may differ, but content is easily adaptable on all of this. And the form of this politics is remarkably similar. The political world is structured us and them, and that means we through people and other threatening others. And society must defend, or our people, we have to defend ourselves against these others. And we see the same patterns, I mean, 35 years ago, 30 years ago, or yesterday in Bosnia as in Europe. I mean, there is the myth of salvation, provocation, and scandalization. We see systematic scapegoating and this dead cat strategy. I mean, we can hear for 30 years, Milorad Dodik, or 20 years, he is speaking about referendum in Republika Srpska, separating and dissolution of Bosnia and Herzegovina. And while we are speaking about the referendum and dissolution of Bosnia, we don't take a look on corruption, on nepotism, on robbery of state property, and all these things which are going on in Bosnia, but unfortunately not only in Bosnia. And the many people still believe things will eventually return to normal. They are still waiting for 30 years. They are hoping, and they are die for some kind of normal life. And I will just now to conclude with this sentence that Europe, and including Austria, can learn from this experience. And Bosnia show us where decades of fear-based politics, nationalist mobilization, erosion of democratic norms can lead. It is a cautionary tale of how quickly democratic cultures can decay when crisis becomes permanent and when democratic institutions fail to protect themselves. And when we are here, perhaps Kikel or other leaders in Bosnia and Herzegovina who are trying to reproduce this crisis, I think we can take something out from this Bosnian experience and be cautious and be careful with our democratic institutions.
Thank you, Amina. That's a very critical observation of Bosnia's past and present. Now, words from Minister, now it's time to offer more, resonates in my mind again. So if we take your critical assessment serious, then the question is, and we are going to try to tackle it in the second round, what is what do we have to offer now to change this vicious circle of nationalism, reproduction of crisis, etc., and of course also to address the same question not only in Bosnia but also in a wider European context. Josef Marko, you were part of the Bosnian Constitutional Court as national judge between 1997 and 2002, and I think there is a need to emphasize, particularly in this room, Alois Mock Hall, and Minister did it in her introductory remark, the whole range of personalities, diplomats, experts, constitutional judges, ambassadors from Austria, who I would say disproportionately in terms of the population of Austria, were over-proportionally actually represented in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And I think one of the major contributions was also your work regarding the constitution. So, Josef, when you look back at all the efforts to change the Bosnian constitution, I mean, there was one of the efforts where also Wolfgang played a role in 2004, 2005 with the Association of Bosnia and Herzegovina and Donald Hayes' plans. When you look back, what will be your major takeaway and what can we learn from those efforts?
Yeah, thank you so much for this very tricky question. Which would require, from a professor, at least a 3 hours lecture. But I try to make it short. First of all, when we started as judges, in particular as international judges of the Constitutional Court, so I was one of 3 international judges among 9 judges after the model of the US Supreme Court with 9 judges. We thought, well, it's the constitution, and it is a very difficult constitution, and also our colleagues on the bench told us, yeah, Bosnia-Herzegovina is a složena država, a complex state, and of course the situation in Bosnia-Herzegovina is a unique situation. You cannot compare it with any other situation, and in the end I found out, well, is it really the constitution which is the problem? And of course, then you have all these judgments of the European Court of Human Rights since the so-called Sedic and Finci case from 2009 and a series of other cases until 2020 from Mr. Budaric, which says, well, it's ethnic discrimination. So the ethnic quota system on the one hand, for the presidency as well as for the second chamber, the House of Peoples, in combination with the electoral system based on territorial delimitation into 2 entities, amounts to ethnic discrimination. So, basically, the constitution has to be changed. So, but more and more, from a comparative perspective, you start to ask yourself, is it really true that it's the constitution as such? And we have heard already many things, not only anecdotal evidence, but also analysis, that it is also the implementation through the party system, the political party system, which we have to take into consideration. And therefore, it's my thesis to say, well, it's not really the constitution which is the problem, or the ethnic quotas as such, which are the problem, because you have the same situation in Belgium, the division into linguistic groups in both houses of parliament and the House of Representatives as well as the Senate. The parliament of the bilingual region Brussels completely resembles the electoral system for the Federation of Bosnia-Herzegovina. And I have done a lot of studies in this regard because I was a legal counsel to Mr. Kovacevic in the latest case before the at the European Court of Human Rights, where we lost the case. But anyhow, if you compare, then you see, well, what is Bosnia really unique? And I say, no, the uniqueness is basically the cartel of power established on the basis of the Dayton Constitution by the mono-ethnic party system and the complete fragmentation of the electorate into ethnic units, so that you have a system of give and take between the mono-ethnic parties and the respective ethnic electorate, which makes it impossible that Nasza Stranka, for instance, would win more than 2 or 3% of the votes in any of the elections so far. And of course, you have also anthropological research that people on the ground are completely rational if they vote for ethno-national parties, because what should they do in case of state capture, corruption, and what else, and also control of the electoral results or the electoral process. So students from Bosnia and Herzegovina still tell me there is no secret voting process possible. The boss of a company will simply tell you, you have to make a picture with your hand here. What are you going to vote for? And send it to me. So can there was any secrecy? Can this be democracy if you have such a system of electoral fraud? And in this regard, I think this is my first lecture which I learned. We have to see that it is the party system, that the political parties, and therefore also the European Union and the European political parties and the European Parliament and the party families have completely failed to talk to their party members in Bosnia and Herzegovina. I had a chance also to interview Milorad Dodik in 2008 in Laktaši. It was a very interesting visit in Laktaši to visit him in his office. I thought I would be in a mafia film, but let alone all these anecdotal evidence. But when I asked him, why do you call your party a social democratic party? I asked him, what is your definition of social democracy within a 2 hours interview? And he 5 times repeated simply one phrase. It's the defense of the Serb national interest. This is social democracy. I have no idea why he was really never asked the European Parliament, for instance, whether this is the general definition of social democracy. But to come back here, the second problem is, of course, that I see also that the influence of the neighboring states. This makes the real difference, for instance, from the experience in Northern Ireland, when we try a little bit to compare, to say, well, no, Bosnia is not so unique, come on. And the influence of the Republic of Croatia, as well as the influence from Serbia, is a very strong influence on the internal affairs of Bosnia and Herzegovina. And I think this makes a huge difference when we look into the situation for the Good Friday Agreement, where the United States, together with the Republic of Ireland, the government of the Republic of Ireland and Westminster played a rather different role in order to come to an agreement and to a compromise with the Good Friday Agreement. And the third lesson, which I have learned in the end, is when you ask me, therefore, in combination with, it's not the Constitution. No, the real problem is, of course, the perceptions we have. And the foreign minister already declared, is it a forward-looking approach which we have to take, or a backward-looking approach? There is no consent, there's no consensus against the anecdote we were told from Northern Ireland. There is no consensus on the history of the Yugoslav wars, the solution of Yugoslavia and the wars on the territory of former Yugoslavia. And I think what we have to see is also now the educational system and the completely segregated educational system until the very day. and the textbooks. So there is Heike Kargel now in Graz, which has analyzed the textbooks in Bosnia and Herzegovina only 2 years ago, finding out that much of hate speech and animal stereotyping until the very day. So I think it is therefore very important that the international community, whoever feels affected by the term international community, has also to go into the field of culture. I always heard from European Union representatives, no, culture is not a competence of the European Union. Sorry, we can't do anything about in this field. And I think that in particular, the desegregation of the educational system as well as the media system would be the way forward in order to overcome what will be in the end intergenerational vengeance of the young people.
Thank you, Josef. I think in the second round we have to introduce something that I describe as a realistic hope, because right now we are entering a cycle of profound analysis, which at the same time ruins the party and celebration. On a serious terms, I now want to ask Andreas Herdiner, who has his Bosnian experience from the 90s, to provide certainly, and when we organized the preparation for this event, you told us one or two very interesting stories. And I think anecdotal evidence, Josef Mark referred several times to anecdotal evidence, but also to a profound analysis. But I think, Andreas Herdiner, if you could share one or two interesting stories, and I think also telling stories tells us about the past time and about the past 30 years.
Yes, thank you. I certainly can. What my experience was in the first 2 years, at least, was that in peace implementation process, you have to push and push and push, and the breakthroughs only come step by step. You push for a long time, and then suddenly things go. And I can tell a few examples. I mean, it was mentioned before how people lived at the beginning in fear and trepidation, and also mistrust. And I arrived on the 12th of March, 1996. It was just after the handover of Grubavica to the city of Sarajevo, and the Italian Bersaglieri was still driving around in armored vehicles with their feathers on their helmets, etc. And shortly after that, we had the first meeting of the presidency, which was Izetbegovic, Krajisnik, and Zubak. And alone to get these three gentlemen into one room was a problem. The door had to be wide enough for three to enter beside each other, so that door would not have been enough. The table had to be round. The flower arrangement was not perfect because the leaves were too green and represented too much of a Muslim element. And the music we had to also find at the end, we found Grieg from Norway because that was neutral enough. Another thing we had to find after a while, I would say it might have been end of 90, beginning 90, summer of 97, I saw, because I traveled around 70,000 kilometers in the country, I saw cars from the different ethnic group crossing the zone of separation. Because in the old Yugoslavia, you had the same system as we have in Austria or in Slovenia or Croatia. You had the districts, and then you had, in the old times, you had the Red Star. But then during the war, the Bosniaks introduced the fleur-de-lis, and the Croats had the Zahovnica, and the Serbs had their three S's and the eagle. And so nobody dared to cross into the other patch with the wrong number plates. So we designed, in the OHR, we designed the number plates that still exist now. 3 numbers, a letter, and then 3 numbers again, which got people crossing the lines again with less fear. Another thing we had to do was, for instance, to develop the national flag, because the politicians never would have agreed on any flag. So we created the one with the triangle, and everybody could think what a triangle means, either the shape of Bosnia or three ethnic groups or just a perfection or whatever. And then we designed the stars, and you will notice that that these stars are not complete. So there's no number that you could divide to have an interpretation of that. And then, for instance, I'm from Tyrol, and I noticed that the Serbs from Banja Luka were not daring to go to Germany or Austria via Croatia at the time. They were fearing to go in with their number plates. And the SDS at the time, they were very much against people leaving because a good Serb could never go to Croatia. So I contacted Tyrolean Airways, and they made a flight from Vienna to Banja Luka at the time, which lasted for a while, until this was not necessary anymore. But the more difficult things were, I was in charge of refugee return. And that was with the zone of separation. And there it only, after 2 years of pushing, we could establish what was called the RRTF, Return and Reconstruction Task Force, where the task in that, after that war was actually not like in any other war, where the refugees were just a side product of the conflict. Here they were deliberate. It was a part of ethnic cleansing. So the whole thing was to reverse the ethnic cleansing. And you had local politicians, which had the inverse Clausewitz. The politics is the continuation of war. And there, I was very motivated, and I think we all were, that we were on the side of the people against these types of politicians, as you said, ethnic politicians who were just abusing people. And we saw that particularly in the zone of separation, where we had what we called the renter crowd thing, putting people in danger to make a political statement, and people who had a sincere wish to go home. And the last example I would just want to bring is, for instance, the body traders. All three had already during the war people who were in charge of trading bodies from the mass graves. And this was, you give me one body, I'll give you one body, etc., etc. So at the beginning, they didn't dare to cross over the former front lines. And we had to send in our people with satellite telephones to say, now both are ready, one here, one there, different part of the country. So now we can start digging. And then one only found 5 bodies, and telephone, they've only found 5. We cannot continue on the other side because 5 is enough. And it took 2 years until these body traders and the groups of people who were affected, or the family members who had lost people, saw it as a common goal to unearth the people in the mass graves. And we did that by bringing these body traders. We had masses of meetings with them together, and we did what we called the pressure cooker approach. We had contacts with all these groups of people, affected people, and then the body traders all blamed each other, and they didn't know that we had set up a meeting where we had made all the 3 groups, Serbs, Croats, Bosniaks, these family meetings in one room, and then we let these guys in and said, now you answer to them. And that made it a common interest of these people to unearth mass graves. The problem we had was, of course, what we called surface bodies, which sometimes were booby-trapped. So you had all kinds of practical problems. And my feeling was that in '98, you had this sort of breakthrough when they had a common effort on finding bodies where there was possible to make refugee return, where there were 2 factors which were needed, or 3 factors which were needed: a group that wanted to return, a situation on the other side where there was not so much obstruction politically by some sort of idiot against it, keeping ethnic cleansing alive, and then the houses were shouldn't be too destroyed, so that we could finance, or the European Commission could finance the reconstruction. That's basically in things I saw at the beginning. You asked what the Austrian contribution was. I'll just say 3. And one thing, just with return, we still in '98 had 2 difficult, the need to install 2 permanent representatives of the High Representative in 2 places, one in Srebrenica and one in Dirva, the second was me, to de-escalate the tensions that were still in these 2 parts of the country. So it was a lot of hard work, and we lost 5 of our colleagues who were killed, and I think it was worth it because we were with the people, and the developments afterwards, of course, are not so much encouraging. But what Austria did, first of all, they had Ambassador Valentinescu here, who could speak to all parties and is fluent in all the languages there. We had the Austrian army in the Auslog, the Austrian logistics battalion in what was called Beluga, Belgium, Luxembourg, Greece, and Austrian transport companies. And we had, and Austria had, just so many personal links which could, and company links which just could restart after the war, and so much local knowledge. My wife, she was seconded by the Finnish Foreign Ministry. I was seconded by the Austrian Foreign Ministry. She had to do things for the ministry. The Austrians never asked me for anything because the Austrian Foreign Ministry had enough contacts without me. They had him and everybody else.
An important takeaway, Austrian ministers of foreign affairs always have a lot of contacts. Thank you so much, and thank you also for reminding us of the refugee return, because when you read the content of the discussion, one of the last questions that we put here is also what lessons can be taken from Bosnia and Herzegovina to peace building and post-conflict or still conflict, ongoing conflicts in Europe. And I think here, of course, about the Russian aggression to Ukraine, which was mentioned by Madam Minister, where a question of return at a certain point will be on the table. Now for the second, and I think a quicker round, because we want to open up to your short comments and the questions. Now you have seen all the complexity, anecdotal complexity, analytical complexity, political difficulties that we share and have, but also some positive and bright lights, at least shining, shimmering through the Bosnian reality. For the second round, I would like to ask you all for 2 quick points. The first one, when you look, and we stand here 2025, and Madam Minister was quite explicit what Austria is going to do when it comes to the Western Balkans and what European Union should do. It's time to decide, it's time to offer more, no secession, we will be a partner, we want to emphasize dialogue. That's a clear statement from the Austrian foreign policy. On the table, I would like to ask you all 2 quick points. The one will be, what do you see as the main opportunity or the next important step that should be taken now in 2025 in order to have, when we celebrate 2035, to have a stable, functional European Bosnia and Herzegovina? And the second quick point, what do you think particularly should Austria do as an important member, as a friend of the Western Balkans and Bosnia, and also someone who is very much committed to the EU integration? So, Janeta, 2 quick points for all of you, and then we still have some time to collect a few questions and comments. Janeta, your turn.
All right, I'll be quick, which goes against my professorial moments, but here we go. I think a lot of us on the panel have mentioned this, you know, whether we call it polycrisis, whether we call it sort of this moment with the Russian aggression, with the sort of 30 years, look, what have we done, question mark, etc. I think it very much reflects the fact that when we look at, you know, where the world was 30 years ago, you can really think about it as the high of liberal peace building, right? And the Dayton Peace Accords basically were reflective of this. And over the last 30 years, that has kind of gone down. We see the waning of influence of the United States. That will continue. We see the sort of European moment of shock and not really knowing what to do, and here we are, and let's move forward. And I think Bosnia and Herzegovina has in very many ways been sort of at the front lines of this liberal peace building. So Dayton, yes, has maintained the peace, great, but, and the but is why we're here. And so maybe I will sort of say that we need to move beyond this role, as a colleague of mine has said, containing this instability, right, rather than enabling the sovereignty of the country. And this has been very concrete, right, in the sense of, moving beyond sort of just defending the OHR as existing and very sort of, symbolic statements towards really actually enabling the country's sovereignty, whether that means, changing the electoral law to be something that resembles more potential in terms of moving towards actual representation of the citizens of the country, to, actually implementing the multiple, court results that we have had to sort of foster this movement towards Dayton 2.0, right? Because it wasn't meant to be a permanent situation. And here we are 30 years ago still working on, documents that were drafted in 1995. So I think I see this as an opportunity in terms of really being an actor. And I think Austria here has very much that potential to be an actor. And again, as a migration scholar, and I say this all the time and everywhere, and nobody listens to me, and probably nobody will ever listen to me because it's Austria and a very close citizenship regime, but the potential of dual citizenship and changing the citizenship regime in this country is real. When we look at the sort of number of individuals from this region that are living here, and the sort of living this transnational life or lives between Bosnia and Herzegovina and Austria, and have been for many, many generations. And I think that holds, not just for Bosnians and Herzegovinians. I think it holds across the board for many sort of migrant populations in the country. And I say this without any agenda. I do not want Austrian citizenship. So I'll end there.
Thank you so much. Wolfgang, your take. 2 points.
One of the most important.
Can you use the mic?
Sorry.
Yes.
One of the most important issues is really for Bosnia, whose governance system is quite weak and decentralized. There are all the problems coming along with Dayton, of course, we have not discussed, and cannot also be dramatically changed, although there was a real moment of potential change possible when we successfully finished the reform of the two entity constitutions, which was meant by us at the time, 2001, as being a stepping stone towards Dayton II, towards the constitutional reform of the state. And we have prepared everything. The first 10 years, basically the groundwork for Bosnia-Herzegovina was laid. Yeah? The state court, remember, constitutional court, the state court, state prosecutor, and all these things, if they would not have been established at the time when we did it, with the consent of Mr. Dodik at the time, yeah, Mr. Dodik's downfall would not have been possible. Because if you would have had only the two entity judicial systems in place, yeah, you could have, that would not have happened, of course. So I think to stabilize and to do this work, and now the second point is where Austria really should do something about it, is Bosnia will always remain the weakest part in the Western Balkans, in this chain of 6 countries. First of all, it's important to think in terms of including Bosnia-Herzegovina in this family of European nations, in the European Union. Yeah? It will be easier with the neighboring countries. It will not be this kind of problem, who is crossing which border and to who is taking in what, and then combining the necessary steps that still need to be taken, reform steps in the state governance system, combining this with the accession process. No other country is so badly prepared for joining the European Union as is Bosnia-Herzegovina. Also, not just in the divided politics, you know that Bosnia and Herzegovina this year has lost more than 100 million from European Union funds, yeah, because they could not agree at the state level, at the government, yeah, and no protests happened. This is another point. There is not enough civil society around because they are also divided along ethnic lines, most of them, yeah. So unlike in Serbia, where you have a strong civil society, strong protest movement, there was once or twice, Valentin, at your time when this tragedy happened, and they burned down some of the government buildings. This was it, yeah. So this is something, of course, which is an extra issue. But you need to really combine these necessary and still outstanding reform steps and really focus on the state level, which we established at the time. When I arrived there were 3 ministers or 3 ministries. We immediately went up to 6 and so on. So this is in place, but it is too weak, and the public does not really believe that this is important and necessary. And only the state of Bosnia and Herzegovina can enter the European Union, as we know. So that needs to be stressed and do this in practical terms. We do have now, since a few years, the idea that step-by-step accession is something which could do the trick in the Western Balkans. The more so even is this the case in Bosnia and Herzegovina, with a strong reform agenda promoted by the European Union, that these are, so to speak, for the 35 chapters, the preconditions. You just wave them into the accession process, and then I believe these things can happen. They will not happen divorced from the actual accession process, yeah? This is something I believe needs to be done, and I would like to stop here.
Thank you, Wolfgang. Quick turn to Amina. Amina, your take, your 2 points.
Yes, I will try to be quick and a little bit optimistic this
No,
time.
of course, that's fine.
No, always when I think about the Bosnia or on Bosnia, I always, or when I see Bosnia, I always see 2 levels. One level is this political level, which is horrible and it's miserable. But there's the other level, the level of everyday life. And despite this difficult political structure, I would say that Bosnian society should not be seen as completely divided. I mean, there are a lot of inter-ethnic, would I say, no, not only inter-ethnic, but all these contacts, and these contacts are functioning great or very well. That means the people maintain the friendships, they do business, they work together, they marry, and they don't meet each other as Serb, Croats, Bosniak, and so on. They meet as man and Frau, women, or as city dwellers and villagers, as musicians, as students, and so on. And I think there is the potential for Bosnia. I wouldn't say they meet in a terms how we would like to see it from a Western perspective in a terms of reconciliation. They don't use these terms, reconciliation, or they don't talk about the war. And I'm not sure why is it that not so bad don't to talk about the war, because the war is 30 years behind these people, and I don't think it is really necessary to talk about it. I mean, they have a lot of in common that they can use for the future, and these meetings are actually pragmatically motivated, and these pragmatism I would say is something where I see hope for Bosnia, so that the new generation will try to change something, despite they don't leave Bosnia in the next 10 years to emigrate, because they are trying to change the society and hopeless. And for Austria, I would just say they should keep this government also by the next elections, because it depends on the parties who are in power in Austria and in other countries. How will this reflect on Bosnia and on all Western Balkan countries?
Yeah, Amina's magic stick will be needed. Josef Marko.
Yeah, 2 points. The first point is, of course, because I'm a constitutional lawyer, the question of constitutional reform. A reform of the Dayton Constitution is at the very moment a no-go. This will not happen within the next 20 years with the same approaches which have been undertaken so far. That both the US as well as the European member states of the European Union and have been trying to convince the party leaders of the mono-ethnic parties to find a compromise on constitutional reform for the implementation of the so-called Sejdic and Finci package of the judgments of the European Court of Human Rights. This is over. Nobody talks about it. Nobody is willing to talk about this sort of necessary constitutional reform, and even the European Union has at the very moment certainly not the leverage, the political leverage, to force the political party leaders to implement the Sejdic and Finci package. So, on the other hand, as Wolfgang Peter also has already mentioned, who is the civil society? So when we were in Sarajevo only 10 days ago for the conference with the university, one of the basic messages was passivity is even a national characteristic of Bosnian people in comparison to Serbia and the students in Serbia, let alone other US. So I do not subscribe myself to this conclusion. But again, civil society is an amorphous concept. Who is civil society? And therefore, and this is the proposal which I have been working on for a couple of years now, together with colleagues from other universities in Italy, the Netherlands, and Belgium, that we try to bring together the university people from all the universities in Bosnia and Herzegovina, from political science faculties, from law faculties, from philosophy faculties, to discuss the basic 20 concepts of the Dayton constitutions. And believe it or not, there is absolutely no consensus what is the meaning of federalism. Because when a Bosniak says, we want federalism, then the Serbs will immediately say, no, they do not really want federalism. What they want is a strong central government, centralization, not federalism. And the other way around, when Serbs speak about confederation or federation, then the Bosniaks will immediately say, no, come on. This is simply a fake, because in reality, they want secession. So even the concept of federalism as such is hotly contested among professors of public international law, constitutional law, or political sciences. So I do not see a way out as long as we do not find ways and means of what can be called second-track diplomacy in order to work together with people on the ground, not NGOs in this time, but to say, no, we have to bring together those people who might be the future leaders, intellectual leaders, as well as the reservoir for political parties in the future, to discuss the future of the country. My vision for Bosnia, I have a vision for Bosnia, but I will not tell you my vision for Bosnia because this is not my task. To impose my vision of Bosnia. This was also my position as in charge of the Constitutional Court. No, come on. It's your turn, to decide about the future of your country. What we can do, however, is to help you in order to develop strategies and ways and means and approaches, to find together, to start to discuss and not travel to conferences in London, New York, Washington, or Belgrade, or Zagreb, give a speech in a conference, and then immediately disappear again. So that there was never, over the last 25 years, any dialogue, even between the universities and the university professors from the country. They did not talk with each other, they did not discuss with each other. And this is, I think, a very necessary step and point where Austria could really help due to the cultural background of Austria. When we talk about, I do not use the catchwords again, state capture or corruption, yeah, come on, yeah. So in this regard, I think this has to be done in the future in order to bring people together to start discussion on the possible also legal institutional makeup of the country, because the European Court of Human Rights in its judgments again does not say power sharing is completely prohibited. Power sharing as such is, or ethnic quotas as such is discrimination. No, they say power sharing is okay, but what you must avoid is discrimination. But again, if you ask a constitutional lawyer, how do you square the circle between ethnic quotas and non-discrimination, this is the real task which we have no answers so far as constitutional lawyers or as political scientists, and therefore we should really try to discuss together with our colleagues what does it mean, yeah, in reality, yeah, to come to a middle way or to a third way in order for institutional arrangements. And in this regard, I think what has to be seen, it is the entity constitutions and the laws which have been amended after 2002, which introduced more and more ethno-nationalist elements also in the institutional arrangements. And this is the way where to start, to find people to use the mechanisms of judicial review within Bosnia and with regard to the European Court of Human Rights to fight ethnic discrimination on the ground. And this brings me again to the second point, rule of law. You have mentioned it. This was one of the basic failures. Elections do not create democracy. I can only repeat that. Rule of law was completely lost in the very beginning, and it is very important that also Austria takes the initiative in order to participate in rule of law reforms, in the reform of the judiciary. The High Judicial and Prosecutorial Council in Bosnia and Herzegovina is one of the examples. When you have a president of this council who is corrupt, come on, how can the judiciary work, yeah, in such a country? Thank you.
Thank you, Josef. Andreas Helena, do you have the final one magical stick point?
Me? I mean, I left Bosnia and Herzegovina in March 1999.
Sometimes when you're from the distance,
I haven't been back, and I haven't been following things because I've been doing all kinds of other things. But I want to make two remarks. I mean, this sort of idea of collective rights for constituent peoples is not only an invention of the Dayton Peace Accords. It was already there with the Ottomans, it was there with the Austrians, it was in the Paneldiskussion Constitution of Croatia from 1939 to 1941. It is very ingrained, and it's actually the wrong model. I mean, to have such rights, say, for the Slovene minority in Austria, where you have a big majority population and a small minority, that makes sense. But in Bosnia, the Bosniaks are majority, but in the old Yugoslavia, they're minority, one has to have a different approach, and I think one has to approach it that everybody is a citoyen of the country. But how to do it when you have a constitution like that is a different matter. But what I just want to end on an anecdote. We should address what Amina called the other layer, where people just interact with each other normally, and we should not fall into the trap of reinforcing stereotypes. And I remember very well, quite early, 1997, something like that, or even 96, I was invited to a dinner by a colleague, and the colleague invited another colleague who was from Scotland, and he had married a girl, a Serb girl from Pale. And she was one of the first, or I think the first ever non-official who I saw come down from Pale. And I chatted with her a long time, and we chatted, etc. And at the end of the thing, she said she was very grateful that I never addressed her as a Serb from Pale. I just addressed her as a lady. And I think that's the approach you have to take with this second level of people. Don't fall into the trap of stereotyping people according to this constitution, which we don't like.
That's a very important one. Thank you so much. I see mics ready for you, and I also see that we don't have a lot of time. We still do have time, and I don't think that we have time for 2 rounds, but we have time for at least 1 round. I see Valentin Inzko wants to say something. Bosnia ambassador. So if we have 2, 3, 4 short, but emphasis on short comments and questions, and then we can try to have a very quick wrap up on the panel. So, Valentin Inzko.
Is in South Korea and in Japan now for 80 years. Then in Cyprus, which is in European Union, we have international troops for 60 years. So a long-term approach. In Austria, of course, it was different because we had a good democracy, there was press freedom, and so the Allied forces like /OHR, if you like, they left in 55 after 10 years of presence. We also have sent home too early foreign judges and prosecutors. We still have 3 international judges in the Constitutional Court, thanks God, But we have had also judges and prosecutors at working level. Then one point which was also discussed, which Mr. Marco mentioned, rule of law. We have turned a blind eye, and we didn't ruthlessly support the rule of law and strengthening independent judiciary, etc. And even this glorification of war criminals and so on, it went on too long. And what is also interesting, we have discussed that in the case of Bosnia and Herzegovina, we have instruments, but we are not using them, And the instruments are quite strong. We have not such instruments in Montenegro, for example, or in Macedonia, but in Bosnia we have EUFOR Althea. It's true, it is very small, it's almost irrelevant. We have the Brčko arbitration, which is also an instrument. We have the High Representative and his bomb powers, which were supported by the Security Council, Resolution 1144. We have ICTY, if you like. We have a Chief Prosecutor, Mr. Bramac. These are all instruments. And I think also we have the people behind us. If we would really introduce ruthlessly and very strongly rule of law, we would have the population behind us. So I think for Austria, this is our neighborhood, and it is a responsibility of our generation to do something. Of course, for Poland, the neighborhood is more Ukraine, but for us, it's the Balkans, and if there is stability, we will have also stability here. And if we consider that drug trafficking, human trafficking, weapons trafficking comes via the Balkans, so we are doing also a good service to all of us. At the end, I would like to be a little bit, different in my approach, because if I would ask you who is the biggest exporter of politicians worldwide, you wouldn't believe that it is Bosnia and Herzegovina. Yeah? There's a small country, for example, where the Minister of Industry is from Bosnia and Herzegovina. The country is called Australia. Edhem Husic is Minister of Industry. We have in the House of Lords, we have Armin Kahelic. Yeah? We have had the Minister of Education in Sweden, Aida Hadji Alic. And of course, we have about, I think, 10 deputies in German parliament, in the Austrian parliament, who originate from Bosnia and Herzegovina. And of course, not to forget Alma Zadic, who was an excellent Minister of Justice. But of course, she studied at Columbia, she studied in Piacenza, and also in Vienna. This is Bosnian people, and if they will be in charge, a miracle could happen in Bosnia and Herzegovina.
We just need to take care that they don't leave all. Bosnian ambassador, please.
Thank you. Does this work? Yeah. Thank you, Professor Džihić, actually Bosnia and Herzegovina ambassador.
Of course, of course.
Speaking of identities and other things. Thank you very much for the opportunity. In order to try to be on the line of Professor Karabegovic, who said there is a foreign policy of Bosnia and Herzegovina, I would have to refrain from any deep insight and commenting of what has been told here, because if I would do so, this would hardly represent the opinion of my country, because there is a quite divided opinion on major issues which we were discussed here today, and this is a relevant point as well. What I can say is that on a personal note, that I really do believe that we need to celebrate this anniversary because it's 30 years of peace. It was not only the end of war, it was also a stable peace without major incidents for the whole period of time, which is quite important. And I think that it's also, after 30 years, it's a final time that local authorities, local politicians, whoever they are, take the responsibility and take the country further without major interventions from the what we colloquially call international community in Bosnia and Herzegovina. I believe that without direct involvement and interventions which we have been facing in the past, some of them were quite useful for the very post-war period, but unfortunately they failed to build a state. And I believe that state building needs to have a deeply domestic roots, otherwise the collapse is always a threat. The local politicians, without direct interventions, of course with help of our friends, could be a good solution to build the trust, to make some new deal among the whoever, ethnic groups, nations, religious groups, however you call them, in order to go away from this mud where we are stuck already for the 30 years. Mr. Petric said that we are the least prepared country for the European Union. I partly disagree. I think we did a lot of good work and mining work on our own without much of help like some other countries in the East. For example, the hard questionnaire, we did it on our own with a real hard work comparing to some other countries who had a strong support from the Brussels and many other examples. Somebody in the beginning mentioned Big Bang. I truly believe that the new Big Bang is a solution for all our region. I believe that with all due respect to my Montenegrin colleague and their strong effort to become a part of the European Union soon, looking into our internal relations in the Southeast Europe or Western Balkans, if you like, I think we will be stuck longer than we deserve. That I believe that in the next couple of years, the region of the Western Balkans should be a part of the Europe, and I think the Europe is not complete without countries of the Western Balkans. Just a few points which are mentioned here, which I would disagree actually that there are true information from Mr. Joseph Marco. You mentioned education with segregation and hate speech. I disagree that there are hate speech in the textbook. It is ethnic-oriented or divided, or however you want to say, but there is no pure segregation. There is a phenomena of the so-called two schools under one roof, but you know, this is not the product of people of Bosnia and Herzegovina. OSCE and the international community made this, it was not us. I truly believe that the education should be a free choice of anybody, in this case, Croats and Bosniaks, whether they're going to send their children to Croat or Bosniak school. And I think it's not an issue at all. For example, in Zenica, in my born town, there is a Catholic gymnasium, which is attended with about 30–40% of the non-Croat, non-Catholic people, which means when there's equality in place, nobody cares whether the school is Catholic or something else. Weak civil society, well, I fully disagree. Not because I spent there 14 years of work, but I think the international community invested a lot in civil society, and they were quite active in different portfolios and many initiatives, including legislation, rule of law, human rights, maybe at the first point, divided along ethnic lines. Well, many other things are, so including civil society, but I disagree that the civil society in the country is a weak. And to end, Austrian role can be very, very appreciated. Austria is a country which knows Bosnia and Herzegovina purely, knows our issues, our deadlocks, and with its quiet diplomacy and friendly approach to everyone, I think it can help in the future that we come together on our own without of high representatives and international judges or whoever to make a new agreement on the way forward, and the only way forward is European Union. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I see 2 or 3 more hands, and then I think we have to conclude. Hannes? Yeah. But, yeah, if you agree, we can also, yeah.
Okay. No longer remarks. Just one question. Valentin said our neighborhood is Bosnia, and for Poland, Bosnia-Herzegovina, and for Poland, it is Ukraine. But what is, if Ukraine has an influence on the situation in Bosnia-Herzegovina? What is when there's a peace agreement, whatever is called peace agreement? I doubt it's a peace agreement, but anyway, and there is a land swap. There is some change in land. What does it mean for Bosnia, and how would you argue that this cannot be an example? I may mention that tomorrow evening in the IIP we'll also discuss this question, but maybe one short sentence from you. How would you say that is not any example for Bosnia, Herzegovina, what is happening in a peace agreement on Ukraine?
Thank you, Hannes. Then lady on the... Yes?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for this panel. Daniela here from Sarajevo. I'm thinking a lot about this constitutional reform that Mr. Joseph Marco was talking about and its importance. And we know, of course, that changing our constitution would go against Dayton, and that could open a Pandora box, let's say. And you were also mentioning the main problem of lack of political will. But let's imagine that one day we will have political will to have a constitutional reform. Let's say that one day people wake up and come to its senses that, I don't know, start voting for my party, Naša stranka, and then we will have political will as well. As constitutional lawyer, what would be some pragmatical first steps you would actually recommend to take in such a case?
Thank you so much. And 2 last very quick questions and remarks, Stephanie and Luca.
Thank you very much. Stefania Spirovska from North Macedonia. I'm also part of the youth initiative that Vedran mentioned at the beginning. So in one of the conferences, because we get a chance to participate in a lot of conferences, I've heard something that really stayed in my mind. And that was, for any big social change, you need people in the streets and Austrians, which which in this case would mean strong civil sector, strong, what's the word, strong, strong civil sector and people who would act on what they believe. And on the other hand, they will need the international support. And first of all, I forgot to mention that I really liked how we got the behavioral, the political, the academic, and every background and analysis of the problematic, and it was quite informative and interesting to follow. And some of the things that were mentioned, connected with this sentence that I've remembered, provoked me to think about two things. One is what is happening with the civil sector currently, and is the civil sector the one to be blamed now if we take into consideration the amount of support it gets, the cuts in the budgets for the civil sector on international level, not only in the particular case of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and what could the role of the European Union now, in lack of other roles currently, be in order to strengthen or just support the civil society? That's the first question that I have. And the second question is, when we're talking about the support from abroad, but also the support of the people that have left the country or work abroad, how open do you think that the government, or are there any conditions for the government in Bosnia and Herzegovina to use the potential of the diaspora? And when I'm talking about the diaspora, I'm talking about the academics, the politicians, the people who have the knowledge and the experience and are currently abroad. Are we, or is the situation, so to say, developed enough for the country to use the potential that it has, but it's being abroad, so that particular changes can take place? Thank you.
Thank you. And last but not least, Luka Čekić, 25 seconds you have.
That will be interesting to manage, but yeah, first of all, I would like, my name is Luka Čekić. I worked previously for the International Institute for Peace. Now I'm at the World Institute for Nuclear Security, so completely unrelated topic, but still very passionate about this. I have two statements, two questions in 25 seconds.
No, if you manage, otherwise I need to cut you
yes,
after.
Not a problem at all. The first statement is, as long as there are regional influences in the Balkans impacting directly the internal politics of Bosnia and Herzegovina and not properly managed by their European counterparts, I don't think that a solution for Bosnia and Herzegovina is possible. I'm talking about influence from Croatia, talking about influence from Serbia, Srpski mir, Serbian world, and of course the influence from Turkey or Turkey. That's the first statement. The second statement that I have is that in my point of view, how to phrase it, we have been seeing news items currently going on about Aleksandar Vučić, the president of Serbia, being on the hills of Sarajevo, involved in certain actions. But the same gentleman is called by European politicians as my dear friend Aleksandar. So if we want to kind of reconcile with our own past, and I'm talking as a Serb, I'm not blaming Mr. Vučić for being responsible for the killings in Sarajevo, absolutely not. I'm just stating that if we want to reconcile with our past, we have to actually know what our past is. And the same thing goes for Bosnia. First question for the gentlemen who were involved, and thank you for your involvement in securing, let's hope, long-lasting peace in Bosnia and stability. The question is, are you satisfied with what you have achieved? The second question that I have is, how is it possible, and will it ever be possible, to rebuild the trust of the Bosnians and Herzegovinians in their own institutions and in their own politicians that they produce, not for the outside world, but for their country? And this is basically it.
So that was 25 seconds, two statements and two questions, which probably is the best example of flexibility of our youngsters here in diaspora. Anyway, speaking about solutions, now we are 5 or 6 minutes after 7, so we actually wanted to end at 7. There is some food, a small food, finger food, some drinks. I mean, one of the solutions would be that we try to, or you try to address people from the panel and we enter a discussion afterwards. The other solution would be, if the ministry agrees that we can go for 5 or 6 more minutes, but only given the discipline on the panel, we could just have a very quick round. Otherwise, I know that the Alois Mock lights in the hall are switched off at 7:15, so we still have 9 minutes. So if you give us 6 or 7 minutes, just a quick one. I don't think that we can answer all the questions. So many of them are really going deep into the tissue of the Bosnian and Herzegovinian society today. Thank you, Ambassador. I mean, when we speak, we refer to Bosnia and Herzegovina. We keep joking about this kind of abbreviation. And there will be also chances for youngsters. Tomorrow we have workshops. There is also a discussion tomorrow at the International Institute for Peace starting at 6. You are all invited to come, where we also want to take the lessons from Dayton to Ukraine, to Middle East, and ask the questions about peace and conflict resolution today. So 6 or 7 minutes, which requires a lot of discipline. I would suggest that we just turn the panel, so we start from the left and end up with Wolfgang Petric. Andreas Jadina, do you have a very quick answer to one of the questions, or?
Yeah, I'm very pleased and satisfied with what we did in the first 3 years. It was the startup phase after a terrible war where everything was bust and broken. And I'm a bit disappointed what happened afterwards, but that's the answer.
So that's not your blame, huh? So, Josef Marko, you came after Andreas Jadina left.
The real problem is your own position, whether you think that the glass is half full or half empty, and whether you want to achieve negative peace. There have no people killed for 30 years now due to ethnic divisions, or whether you want to achieve positive peace, what you can call also reconciliation, building trust, and so on. And I think there must be a possibility to achieve trust also in the institutions. And there is one very specific example, the citizens' assemblies, which have been tried to bring together on a random selection of people from all over the country to discuss what is going on, what should be changed. However, the European Union delegation, having financed the citizens' assemblies, shelved the final conclusions of the Citizens' Assembly, and newspapers did not report on that. And I think going ahead with these instruments of direct democracy and to say, well, we have also to engage ordinary people on the ground will be the first step forward. And to go ahead to say, well, no, we have to find out what is our vision for the future on the basis of such activities.
Okay, very quickly to Ukraine. I think this is a really important question. I can suppose that will have implication on Kosovo because Putin already mentioned something, compared Kosovo with Crimea. I don't think that we have some border changing in the Balkans because we have peace now, and any changing of the borders will be connected with violence, and no one wants to have violence. I think at least it will stay like this. The asking for contributing, I mean, I'm for 13 years, or we are for 30 years somehow in this job. No one asked me until now to contribute somehow to Bosnia. And last question, yes, the Srpski Mir advertising of my book is coming then next month. So on Ruski Mir and Srpski Svet, so then you can read it. I don't have time to elaborate it, but it is a very important question, and I think it is not possible to have peace with someone also mentioned here these regional actors in the Balkans. So.
Thank you, Amina. Janita, your take.
Very quickly, yes, diaspora is completely underutilized. There we talk about harnessing the potential. We've been talking about it, but there is no political will, as somebody mentioned. And I think increasingly what we're seeing is that there's also less political will from the diaspora to do so, because time does what it does, right? And then just quickly on this question of civil society, on one side, yes, fine, civil society could do more, but at the same time, the majority of civil society actors have also left the country out of frustration, right? And so you have this sort of back and forth, and I think, however, still, if I look at the civil society sort of space in Bosnia and Herzegovina across the board, it is much more multi-ethnic and much more collaborative and much more understanding of the realities and the needs in terms of how we move forward than, for example, the political classes, at least publicly, right? Behind closed doors, they're all buddy-buddy. Thanks.
So the recipe is send politicians to Australia and keep the civil society in town. So Wolfgang Petritsch, your concluding remark.
Yes, where Janetta left off, I think the real elephant in the room in the Balkans is the demographic disaster. In Bosnia, we had more than 4 million before the war. When I left, it was about 4 million 25 years ago. You are now down to about 2.5 million unofficial. In Republika Srpska, and I'm traveling quite a lot in the eastern part, it's empty. It was never really populated there, but it's empty. So what are we talking about, actually, when we say we want to help Bosnia and Herzegovina? This is the main issue. And I know, also from Croatia, to join the European Union is not the only solution to all of this. From from Croatia, 10% have left in the first 10 years because you have a single market. You can go and work everywhere, And to come to Valentin's example, that the greatest export from Bosnia is politicians, this really symbolizes and exemplifies the disaster that is happening there. The best and the brightest are leaving, have been leaving, and we need to address this also to ourselves as the international community, because what has happened, look at Montenegro, or even better, Albania. Albania was, at the time, 30 years ago, in the Stone Age. In 1997, it was a totally destroyed country. This pyramid scheme, totally destroyed. And the former Austrian Chancellor, Franz Vranitzky, did a great job there, by the way. We always forget to point out, because it worked out. Where is Albania today? Where is Montenegro today? And why is the country of Bosnia-Herzegovina, which got the strongest international intervention, the most budget and money, it is way behind Albania, We need to be very self-critical about this, which means international intervention does not really do all the tricks. International intervention in the first 10 years, and I'm always thinking of Austria. After 10 years, we were so glad to get rid of the Allies. Yeah? We are there far too long. This is the real problem. You also need to allow the citizens and the politicians, above all, to make their own mistakes. And do not have someone there who corrects these mistakes. We are not perfect. We believe when we're there, we are perfect. So therefore, we order, you should do this, and I'm talking of myself. But immediately after the war, it was necessary, because the main task of the international presence was to prevent the country from falling back into war. And that was achieved remarkably well, So there is a huge thing around. But we need more trust into the people. And when you say the best and the brightest have left, This is a big problem, I tell you. And we need at least to establish something like a circular migration. You guys from Bosnia, you need to go back. You need to have your contacts there. And you need to help that Vaša domovina, naša domovina, really become something which is a truly a member of the European family of nations. I think this is something where we see it. One last point, forget the United States. The US is out. The last thing they did was Dodik made a deal, hundreds of thousands of tax dollars from Republika Srpska went to Washington for lobbyists, and this is how he got off the list. But he's also off Bosnian politics, I can guarantee.
So thank you so much. Bosnia and Herzegovina lost the soccer game against Austria. No, I mean lost the qualification. But there is a sports where Bosnian and Herzegovinians are first and foremost always winning. This is telling jokes. Be it to cope with the reality of post-Dayton of the last 30 years, be it to offer a ray of light and a way to actually also move forward. And when I was in Sarajevo 10 days ago, someone told me a kind of a serious joke. He said, look at us. We have Dayton. We have stability. Everything is falling apart around. The United States, they are starting fighting, authoritarian tendencies, Vucic, look at that. We could go for 130 years with this Dayton. This is an interesting paradoxy. Anyway, so we have opened up a lot of questions, and we are ending up in a sense of komšiluk. You know, there's this famous Bosnian concept, komšiluk, of good neighborly relations. Thank you for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for your komšiluk and being the host. Thank you, Hannes and Partnering Institutes. Thank you all for joining us tonight. We promise that there will be no 60 years of Dayton in this venue. There will be a totally different type of celebration. We wish you a good night. Join us also for drinks offered by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, European and Foreign Affairs, and see you in some other occasion. Thank you so much.